Sarah Chin adjusted her glasses and stared at the computer screen in front of her. The numbers on the display showed flight patterns, fuel consumption rates, and maintenance schedules for the F-22 Raptor squadron based at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada. To everyone around her, she was just another analyst in the intelligence division. She had been working in this windowless office for 3 years, and most people barely noticed when she walked by. The morning briefing had just ended, and the pilots were heading to their jets for routine training flights. Sarah watched them through the small window that looked out onto the flight line. They walked with confidence, their flight suits crisp, their heads held high. These were the elite of the elite, the chosen few who got to fly the most advanced fighter jet in the world. She envied them, but she also knew something they didn't. Sarah had been flying since she was 16 years old. Her father owned a small airport in rural Oregon, and she had spent her teenage years learning everything about aircraft. By the time she was 20, she could fly anything with wings. She joined the Air Force with dreams of becoming a fighter pilot, but fate had other plans. Her test scores were too high, her analytical skills too sharp. The Air Force needed intelligence analysts more than they needed another pilot, so they put her behind a desk instead of in a cockpit. She never complained. Complaining wasn't in her nature. But every day, she watched the F-22s take off and land, and every day she imagined herself at the controls. She knew every system on that aircraft better than most of the pilots who flew it. She had spent years studying the technical manuals, memorizing the procedures, understanding every switch and button in the cockpit. It was her hobby, her obsession, her secret passion. Colonel Martinez walked into the analyst office that Tuesday morning looking frustrated. He was the squadron commander, a man who had flown combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. His jaw was tight, and his eyes showed the kind of stress that came with impossible problems. Sarah looked up from her computer as he approached her desk. "Chen, I need those fuel efficiency reports on my desk by noon," he said without looking at her directly. "The Pentagon is breathing down our necks about operating costs." "Yes, sir, already working on them," Sarah replied quietly. She had actually finished the reports an hour ago, but she had learned not to seem too eager or too fast. People got suspicious when you finished things too quickly. Colonel Martinez started to walk away, then stopped. He turned back to Sarah with a curious expression. "You've been here 3 years, right?" "Yes, sir." "You know a lot about the F-22 systems." It wasn't a question, but Sarah nodded anyway. "I try to understand the aircraft I'm analyzing, sir." "Have you ever actually been inside one?" Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. This was dangerous territory. "No, sir, but I've studied all the technical documentation." The colonel stared at her for a moment longer, then nodded and walked away. Sarah returned to her computer, but her hands were shaking slightly. She had almost said too much. The truth was, she had been inside an F-22 cockpit exactly 7 times, always during maintenance periods when the hangar was nearly empty. She had friends among the maintenance crew who understood her passion and looked the other way when she spent her lunch break sitting in the pilot's seat, running through startup procedures in her mind. The afternoon brought news that would change everything. Sarah was working on aircraft availability statistics when she heard shouting from the operations center across the hall. Through the open door, she could see people running back and forth, their faces tense with worry. Something big was happening. Captain Williams, one of the few people in the office who actually talked to Sarah regularly, came rushing over to her desk. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning. "Sarah, we need those F-22 operational status reports right now," he said urgently. "All of them. Every aircraft, every system status, everything you've got." "What's going on?" Sarah asked, her fingers already flying across the keyboard to pull up the files. "There's a situation developing over the Pacific. Multiple aircraft down, and we might need to scramble everything we've got." "How many birds do we have mission ready right now?" Sarah scanned through her data quickly. Her mind processed the information faster than most people could read it. 14 aircraft are fully mission capable, sir. 2 are in maintenance with expected completion tomorrow morning. 1 has a radar issue that won't be fixed until Friday. Captain Williams grabbed the printed reports from Sarah's printer before the ink was dry. "Thanks, you're a lifesaver." He started to run toward the operations center, then stopped. "Sarah, you might want to monitor the emergency frequencies. This could get interesting." Sarah didn't need to be told twice. She had a radio scanner at her desk that was officially for monitoring air traffic control, but she knew how to tune it to military frequencies. As she adjusted the dials, she began to hear fragments of urgent communications. Words like multiple hostiles, civilian aircraft in danger, and immediate response required filled the static-filled airwaves. The next hour passed like a blur. Sarah watched from her small window as ground crews swarmed over the F-22s on the flight line. Pilots were being called in from all over the base. The aircraft that had been scheduled for routine training were now being loaded with live missiles. This was no longer an exercise. Sarah's computer screen showed real-time updates on aircraft status. She watched as one by one, the F-22s changed from training configuration to combat ready. Her heart pounded as she realized that something serious was happening out there in the Pacific, something that required the full might of America's most advanced fighter squadron. At 4:30 in the afternoon, Sarah's world turned upside down. She was updating maintenance schedules when she heard Colonel Martinez's voice booming across the office. "Where's Chen? I need Chen right now." Sarah looked up to see the colonel striding toward her desk with a group of other officers behind him. Their faces were grim, and she could see the weight of command pressing down on Colonel Martinez's shoulders. "Sir, I'm right here," Sarah said, standing up quickly. "I need to know everything about F-22 tail number 05-4098. Everything. Maintenance history, system modifications, pilot qualifications required, everything you can tell me." Sarah's fingers flew across her keyboard. Aircraft 05-4098 was one of the newer F-22s in the squadron, with some of the most advanced electronic warfare systems. "Sir, that aircraft was upgraded last month with the latest stealth countermeasures. It requires Level 5 security clearance for operations, and pilots need specific certification on the new electronic warfare suite." "How many pilots on this base are certified on that system?" Colonel Martinez asked urgently. Sarah checked her pilot qualification database. Her stomach dropped as she read the results. "Sir, according to my records, only Captain Rodriguez has the full certification for that particular configuration." "Rodriguez is already airborne in another aircraft," the colonel said grimly. "Anyone else?" Sarah scanned through the database again, her heart sinking. "Sir, the only other pilot with that certification was Major Thompson, but he transferred to Langley last month." Colonel Martinez cursed under his breath. The other officers exchanged worried glances. Sarah could see the problem developing. They had an aircraft with capabilities they desperately needed, but no one qualified to fly it. In the background, she could hear radio chatter describing a situation that was getting worse by the minute. "Sir," Sarah said quietly, "may I ask what's happening?" Colonel Martinez looked at her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to tell her. Finally, he spoke. "There's a hijacked airliner over the Pacific carrying 300 civilians. The hijackers have electronic jamming equipment that's making it impossible for our standard aircraft to get a clear lock on them. They're heading toward the West Coast, and they've made threats about targeting population centers." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. 300 innocent people, and a threat to cities full of millions more. "Sir, the electronic warfare suite on 05-4098 should be able to cut through any civilian jamming system." "That's what we're counting on," Colonel Martinez said. "But, without a qualified pilot, that aircraft might as well be a paperweight." Sarah's mind raced. She knew the F-22 systems better than almost anyone on the base. She had spent 3 years analyzing every component, every capability, every limitation. She had memorized the operating procedures for the electronic warfare suite because she found the technology fascinating. But she was just an analyst. She wasn't even officially a pilot in the Air Force's records. The colonel was about to turn away when Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know those systems." Colonel Martinez stopped and looked back at her. "What did you say?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth. "Sir, I've studied every technical manual for the F-22, including the classified specifications for the electronic warfare suite. I know how those systems work. Knowing how they work and being able to operate them are two different things, Sergeant." "I understand that, sir. But I also have over 3,000 hours of flight time." The colonel's eyes widened. "Flight time in what?" Sarah's secret was about to come out.
Everything, sir. Single engine, multi-engine, jets, helicopters. I have a commercial pilot's license and an instrument rating. I've been flying since I was 16. The office had gone completely silent. Every officer was staring at Sarah as if she had just announced she could walk on water. In the 3 years she had worked in this office, she had never mentioned her flying experience to anyone. She had kept it hidden, thinking it would only make her job harder if people knew what she really wanted to do. Colonel Martinez stepped closer to her desk. Sergeant Chen, are you telling me that you're a qualified pilot and you've been working as an analyst for 3 years? Yes, sir. The Air Force needed analysts more than pilots when I enlisted. I never brought up my flight experience because it wasn't relevant to my assigned duties. The colonel stared at her for what felt like an eternity. Sarah could hear the wall clock ticking, the hum of computers, the distant sound of jet engines spinning up on the flight line. In that moment, she realized that her entire career, maybe her entire life, was about to change direction. Sergeant, Colonel Martinez said slowly, how familiar are you with F-22 cockpit procedures? This was the question Sarah had been both hoping for and dreading. Sir, I've memorized the emergency procedures manual and the standard operating procedures. I've also. She hesitated, knowing that what she was about to say could get her in serious trouble. I've spent time in the cockpit during maintenance periods, familiarizing myself with the layout. Instead of anger, she saw something else in the colonel's eyes. It might have been hope. Get Captain Williams, Colonel Martinez said to one of the other officers. Tell him to meet me in Hangar 7 with the F-22 simulator keys. He turned back to Sarah. Sergeant Chen, you have exactly 30 minutes to prove to me that you can handle an F-22. If you can convince me that you won't kill yourself or crash a $150 million aircraft, we're going to have a very interesting conversation about your immediate future. Sarah felt her world spinning. 30 minutes ago, she was a nobody analyst updating maintenance schedules. Now, the squadron commander was talking about putting her in the cockpit of America's most advanced fighter jet. The weight of responsibility hit her like a truck. 300 people on a hijacked airliner, millions more potentially in danger on the ground, and it might all come down to whether a quiet analyst could prove she had what it took to be a fighter pilot. As Colonel Martinez strode toward the door, he called back over his shoulder. And, Chen? If this works out, you're going to wish you had mentioned your flight experience 3 years ago. We could have used someone like you. Sarah grabbed her security badge and followed the officers toward Hangar 7. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. For the first time in 3 years, she was about to do what she was born to do. The question was whether she was really ready for what came next. The F-22 simulator sat in the middle of Hangar 7 like a technological monument to human engineering. Sarah had walked past it dozens of times during her 3 years on base, but she had never imagined she would actually sit inside it. The simulator was an exact replica of the F-22 cockpit, complete with every switch, display, and control that existed in the real aircraft. It could simulate everything from routine flight operations to the most challenging combat scenarios. Colonel Martinez stood next to the simulator with his arms crossed, watching as Captain Williams powered up the systems. 2 other pilots, Major Jackson and Captain Stevens, had joined them in the hangar. Sarah recognized them both as experienced F-22 pilots with multiple combat deployments. They weren't here to cheer her on. They were here to witness what would probably be her spectacular failure. Sergeant Chen, Colonel Martinez said as the simulator completed its startup sequence, before you get in there, I want to be absolutely clear about what we're dealing with. The hijacked airliner is currently 400 miles southwest of Los Angeles, flying at 35,000 feet. The hijackers have some kind of electronic jamming system that's preventing our aircraft from getting a target lock. They've threatened to crash the plane into downtown Los Angeles unless their demands are met. Sarah felt the weight of those words settle on her shoulders. 300 innocent people, plus everyone in one of America's largest cities, were depending on whether she could prove herself in the next 30 minutes. The electronic warfare suite on aircraft 05-4098 should be able to penetrate their jamming, the colonel continued, but only if the pilot knows exactly how to configure and operate those systems. Most of our pilots have basic training on electronic warfare, but the advanced countermeasures require specialized knowledge that takes months to master. Major Jackson stepped forward. Sir, with all due respect, putting an untested analyst in an F-22 during a crisis situation could make things worse. maybe we should wait for backup from another squadron. We don't have time, Colonel Martinez replied grimly.
Intelligence suggests the hijackers plan to make their move within the next 2 hours. Every other qualified pilot is either already airborne or stationed too far away to reach the intercept point in time.
Sarah understood the impossible position they were in.
The colonel was considering something that would normally be unthinkable because they had run out of conventional options. She also understood that this might be the only chance she would ever get to prove what she was capable of.
Sir, Sarah said quietly, I'm ready to try.
Colonel Martinez nodded toward the simulator.
Show me what you've got, Sergeant. Sarah climbed into the simulator cockpit and immediately felt like she was coming home.
Every switch and display was exactly where she had memorized it would be from her secret study sessions in the real aircraft. Her hands moved instinctively to the startup controls, beginning the procedures she had practiced hundreds of times in her mind. Engine startup sequence initiated, she announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system.
APU online, main engine spooling up, all systems showing green. Captain Williams, monitoring the simulation from his control station, raised an eyebrow. She's doing the startup procedure perfectly. No hesitation, no checking the manual.
Sarah continued through the procedures, her movements smooth and confident. She configured the electronic warfare systems, set up the radar for air-to-air operations, and performed the pre-flight checks that would normally take a new pilot several minutes to complete.
She finished the entire sequence in less than 3 minutes.
Very impressive, Major Jackson admitted grudgingly.
But startup procedures are the easy part. Let's see how she handles actual flight operations.
Captain Williams activated the flight simulation, and, suddenly, Sarah was airborne over the Nevada desert. The simulator's visual display showed a realistic view from the F-22's cockpit, complete with moving terrain below and a clear blue sky above.
Sarah felt the familiar thrill of flight as she took control of the simulated aircraft. Climb to flight level 350 and intercept heading 240, Colonel Martinez instructed.
Sarah smoothly pulled back on the stick and added power. The simulated F-22 climbed like a rocket, its twin engines pushing the aircraft upward at an incredible rate. She leveled off at 35,000 feet exactly on altitude and turned to the assigned heading with the precision of a pilot who had been flying F-22s for years.
How is she doing this? Captain Stevens whispered to Major Jackson.
She's flying that thing like she's been in F-22s her whole career. I studied, Sarah called out from the cockpit, having overheard the comment. Every manual, every technical publication, every flight procedure. I've been preparing for this moment for 3 years, even if I didn't know it at the time.
Colonel Martinez activated the next phase of the simulation. Sergeant Chen, you now have multiple hostile aircraft approaching from the northwest.
Use your radar and electronic warfare systems to identify and track the targets.
This was where Sarah's specialized knowledge would really be tested.
The F-22's radar and electronic warfare systems were among the most sophisticated in the world, but they required an expert understanding of how to configure them for maximum effectiveness.
Sarah's hands moved across the controls with surprising confidence. Activating AESA radar in LPI mode, she announced. Configuring electronic support measures for threat analysis.
I'm detecting 4 hostile aircraft at bearing 315, range 50 miles, altitude 40,000 feet. The simulation showed enemy aircraft approaching Sarah's position, but they were using electronic jamming to try to hide their exact locations. This was similar to what they would face with the hijacked airliner, where enemy jamming was preventing conventional aircraft from getting a clear picture of the situation.
Can you defeat their jamming?
Colonel Martinez asked.
Sarah's fingers danced across the electronic warfare controls.
She had spent countless hours studying these systems, understanding how they worked at a fundamental level.
Analyzing jamming frequencies, she reported. Reconfiguring AESA beam patterns to burn through their countermeasures. Switching to frequency agile mode. Suddenly, the radar display cleared, showing all 4 enemy aircraft with crystal clarity. The jamming that had been obscuring them was completely defeated by Sarah's expert manipulation of the F-22's electronic warfare suite.
Outstanding, Captain Williams said from his control station. She just did something that takes most pilots 6 months of training to master.
But Colonel Martinez wasn't finished testing her. Sergeant Chen engaged the hostile aircraft using appropriate tactics and weapons systems. This was the ultimate test.
Air-to-air combat in an F-22 required split-second decisions, perfect coordination between multiple weapon systems, and the kind of spatial awareness that separated good pilots from great ones. Sarah took a deep breath and prepared to show them what she was really capable of. Target priority: lead aircraft appears to be coordinating the formation. Selecting AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles for beyond visual range engagement. Sarah's voice remained calm and professional as she configured the weapon systems. Missile 1 away, tracking target 1. Missile 2 away, tracking target 2. The simulation showed her missiles streaking toward their targets while she maneuvered the F-22 to avoid return fire. Her movements were fluid and precise, using the aircraft's incredible agility to stay ahead of the enemy weapons. Direct hit on target 1, she reported. Target 2 is evading, adjusting intercept course. Targets 3 and 4 are closing for visual range combat. What happened next amazed everyone watching. Sarah threw the simulated F-22 into a series of high-G maneuvers that would have been challenging for any pilot, let alone someone who had never actually flown the aircraft before. She used the F-22's thrust vectoring and advanced aerodynamics to outmaneuver the remaining enemy aircraft, eventually destroying all 4 targets without taking a single hit. When the simulation ended, the hangar was completely silent. Sarah sat in the cockpit, her hands still on the controls, breathing heavily from the adrenaline rush. She had just demonstrated flying skills that were beyond what many experienced fighter pilots could achieve. Colonel Martinez walked over to the simulator and looked up at Sarah. Sergeant Chen, in 15 years of squadron command, I have never seen a pilot demonstrate that level of proficiency on their first time in an F-22 simulator. Where did you really learn to fly like that? Sarah climbed out of the simulator, her legs slightly shaky from the intensity of the experience. Sir, I told you the truth. I've been flying since I was 16, but I've never been in military jets before. I just understood that the principles of flight are the same whether you're in a Cessna or an F-22. The F-22 just does everything faster and better. Major Jackson shook his head in amazement. The principles might be the same, but what you just did requires years of training and experience. How did you know to configure the electronic warfare systems that way? I read the technical manuals, Sarah replied simply. All of them. Multiple times. I memorized the procedures because I found them fascinating. I never thought I'd actually get to use that knowledge. Captain Stevens looked at Colonel Martinez. Sir, if she can do that in a simulator, she might actually be able to handle the real thing. The colonel was quiet for a long moment, weighing the decision that could determine the fate of hundreds of innocent people. Finally, he spoke. Sergeant Chen, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to give me an absolutely honest answer. Do you believe you can safely operate aircraft 05-4098 in a real combat situation against a hijacked airliner? Sarah felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had dreamed about, came down to this single question. But, more importantly, hundreds of lives depended on whether she could deliver on what she had just demonstrated in the simulator. Sir, she said, looking Colonel Martinez directly in the eyes, I know I can fly that aircraft safely. I know I can operate the electronic warfare systems effectively. The only thing I can't promise is that I can do it perfectly on my first try, but I believe I can do it well enough to complete the mission successfully. The colonel nodded slowly. That's the most honest answer I could have asked for. He turned to the other officers. Gentlemen, we have a decision to make. We can wait for backup that might not arrive in time, or we can trust that Sergeant Chen can do what she just demonstrated in the real world. Major Jackson stepped forward. Sir, I recommend we proceed. What she just showed us was not beginner's luck. That was the kind of flying that comes from deep understanding and natural ability. If she says she can do it, I believe her. Captain Stevens nodded in agreement. The hijackers aren't going to wait for us to find a perfect solution. Sergeant Chen might be our best option right now. Colonel Martinez looked at Sarah one more time. Sergeant, if we do this, you understand that there's no going back. Once you're in that cockpit, you're responsible for a mission that could determine whether 300 people live or die. Are you prepared for that responsibility? Sarah thought about all the years she had spent dreaming of this moment, all the time she had imagined herself in the pilot's seat of an F-22, all the hours she had spent studying and preparing for an opportunity that seemed impossible. Now that opportunity was here, and it came with the highest possible stakes. "Yes, sir," she said firmly.
"I'm ready."
Colonel Martinez made his decision. "Captain Williams, get Sergeant Chen fitted for flight gear immediately. Major Jackson, I want you and Captain Stevens to brief her on the tactical situation and communication procedures.
We launch in 1 hour." As the officers dispersed to begin preparations, Sarah stood in the hangar looking at the real F-22s parked nearby.
In 1 hour, she would be sitting in the cockpit of one of those aircraft, flying a combat mission that would test everything she had learned and everything she believed about herself. The quiet analyst who had spent 3 years in the background was about to step into the spotlight in the most dramatic way possible. The question was whether she was really ready for what came next, or whether she had just made a promise she couldn't keep. The flight suit felt strange against Sarah's skin as she walked across the tarmac toward aircraft 05-4098. She had worn many different types of uniforms during her Air Force career, but never anything like this. The G-suit wrapped around her legs and torso, designed to keep blood flowing to her brain during high acceleration maneuvers. The helmet felt heavier than she expected, with its built-in oxygen mask and communication systems. Every piece of equipment was a reminder that she was about to do something that most people could only dream of. Aircraft 05-4098 sat on the flight line like a sleeping predator. The F-22 Raptor was an impressive sight even when stationary, with its angular stealth design and powerful twin engines. Up close, Sarah could see the incredible attention to detail that had gone into its construction. Every surface was smooth and precisely machined to deflect radar waves. The aircraft looked like it had been designed by someone from the future and then sent back to the present day. Chief Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior enlisted member of the maintenance crew, met Sarah at the aircraft. He was a man in his 50s with graying hair and hands that showed decades of working on military aircraft. His expression was skeptical as he looked at the young woman who was about to fly his perfectly maintained F-22. "Ma'am, I've been working on these birds for 8 years, he said as he began the pre-flight inspection with Sarah. "I've never seen anyone go from analyst to pilot in one afternoon. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" Sarah ran her hands along the aircraft's surface, checking for any damage or irregularities just as she had learned from the technical manuals. "Chief, I've been studying these aircraft for 3 years. I know every system, every component, every potential failure mode. The only thing I haven't done is actually fly one." "That's a pretty big thing you haven't done," Chief Rodriguez replied dryly. "Knowing about flying and actually flying are two completely different things." "I understand that," Sarah said, continuing her inspection of the aircraft's external systems. "But sometimes you have to trust that preparation and knowledge can substitute for experience, at least long enough to complete one mission." Chief Rodriguez watched as Sarah performed her pre-flight check with the thoroughness and attention to detail of an experienced pilot. She knew exactly where to look for potential problems, exactly which systems to verify, and exactly how to interpret what she was seeing. Her movements were confident and purposeful, showing none of the uncertainty he might have expected from someone who had never flown an F-22 before. "You know what, ma'am?" Chief Rodriguez said as they completed the external inspection. "I'm starting to think you might actually pull this off. I've seen a lot of pilots come and go, and you've got something different about you. You understand this aircraft in a way that most pilots never do." 20 minutes before takeoff, Major Jackson and Captain Stevens arrived to give Sarah her final mission briefing. They spread tactical charts across a small table next to the aircraft, showing the current position of the hijacked airliner and the planned intercept course. "The hijacked aircraft is United Flight 847, Major Jackson explained, pointing to the charts. Boeing 777 with 298 passengers and 12 crew members. It was en route from Tokyo to Los Angeles when it was taken over about 4 hours ago. The hijackers have turned off the transponder and changed course toward the California coast." Captain Stevens added more details. "Intelligence suggests there are at least 3 hijackers on board, possibly more. They've been using some kind of electronic jamming system that's preventing our other aircraft from getting a clear radar lock. That's where you come in. The advanced electronic warfare suite on your aircraft should be able to penetrate their jamming." Sarah studied the tactical situation carefully. "What are their demands? What do they want?" "That's the problem," Major Jackson replied grimly. "They haven't made any clear demands. They've just threatened to crash the aircraft into a populated area unless the United States pays for its crimes. Intelligence believes they might be planning a terrorist attack similar to September 11th. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. This wasn't just about proving herself as a pilot anymore. This was about preventing a catastrophic terrorist attack that could kill thousands of innocent people. She thought about the 298 passengers on the hijacked aircraft, probably terrified and unaware that their lives depended on whether a quiet analyst could rise to the occasion.
What are my rules of engagement? Sarah asked. Captain Stevens hesitated before answering. That's complicated. Obviously, we want to save the passengers if possible.
But, if it becomes clear that the hijackers intend to use the aircraft as a weapon against a populated area, you may be ordered to shoot it down. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. The idea of being ordered to destroy an aircraft full of innocent people was almost unbearable, but she understood the horrible mathematics of the situation. If the hijackers succeeded in crashing the aircraft into downtown Los Angeles, thousands more people could die. I understand, she said quietly.
I hope it doesn't come to that.
So do we all, Major Jackson replied. But, you need to be mentally prepared for any possibility. This is why they don't usually put untested pilots into situations like this. Colonel Martinez appeared at the table as the briefing concluded. Sergeant Chen, you'll be operating under the call sign Raptor 7. You'll be in radio contact with AWACS control aircraft, and I'll be monitoring from here. Major Jackson will be flying wing position in aircraft 05-4102, staying close enough to provide support if needed.
Sarah looked up at the colonel. Sir, will Major Jackson be able to see through the jamming as well?
Probably not, the colonel admitted. His aircraft has the standard electronic warfare suite, which should be effective against most jamming but might not be sufficient for what these hijackers are using. You'll likely be our primary sensor platform for this mission.
The final piece of equipment Sarah needed was a sidearm.
Captain Stevens handed her a standard-issue Beretta M9 pistol in a shoulder holster. The weight of the weapon under her arm was another reminder of how serious this mission had become. I hope you don't need that, Captain Stevens said. But, if something goes wrong and you have to eject over hostile territory, you'll want to have some way to defend yourself. With 15 minutes remaining before takeoff, Sarah climbed into the cockpit of aircraft 05-4098 for the first time. The cockpit was exactly as she had memorized from her studies and her brief experiences in the parked aircraft during maintenance periods, but now every switch and display was live and active. The heads-up display showed flight information, the multifunction displays were alive with system status information, and she could hear the quiet hum of the aircraft's electronic systems.
Chief Rodriguez helped her connect the various life support systems.
The oxygen supply, the G-suit connections, the communication systems, and the ejection seat safeguards all had to be properly configured before she could taxi for takeoff. Each connection was a reminder that she was about to enter an environment where human beings were not supposed to be able to survive without technological assistance.
Remember, Chief Rodriguez said as he completed the final checks, this aircraft wants to fly.
Don't fight it, work with it. The F-22 is the most advanced fighter in the world, but it's only as good as the pilot flying it. Sarah began the engine startup sequence, her hands moving smoothly through procedures she had memorized but never performed for real. The twin Pratt & Whitney engines came to life with a sound like controlled thunder, their afterburners capable of pushing the aircraft faster than the speed of sound. She could feel the power of the machine surrounding her, waiting to be unleashed. Nellis Tower, Raptor 7 requesting taxi clearance for immediate departure, Sarah called into her radio headset. Her voice was steady and professional, showing none of the nervousness she felt inside. Raptor 7, cleared to taxi runway 21 left. Winds 240 at 15 knots, altimeter 30.12. Good luck out there. Even the air traffic controllers knew this was not a routine mission. Sarah taxied the F-22 toward the runway, feeling the aircraft's tremendous weight and power as she maneuvered it along the taxiways. The flight controls were responsive but heavy, requiring more physical strength than the civilian aircraft she was used to flying. Major Jackson pulled up alongside her in aircraft 05-4102, giving her a thumbs-up through his cockpit canopy. Seeing another F-22 so close was an impressive sight, but it also reminded Sarah that she was no longer alone. She had backup, support, and people who believed in her ability to complete this mission successfully. Raptor 7, you are cleared for takeoff, came the call from the control tower. Departure frequency 121.9, squawk 1200.
Godspeed. Sarah taxied onto the runway and lined up with the centerline. The runway stretched out ahead of her for over 2 miles, more than enough distance for the F-22 to accelerate to takeoff speed. She took a deep breath and prepared for the moment she had dreamed about for most of her adult life. "Here we go," she whispered to herself, then keyed her radio. Raptor 7 rolling. Sarah pushed the throttles forward to military power, and the F-22 began to accelerate down the runway. The acceleration was unlike anything she had ever experienced before. The twin engines produced over 35,000 pounds of thrust, pushing the aircraft forward with incredible force. The runway markings blurred past her canopy as the aircraft gained speed rapidly. At 180 knots, Sarah pulled back gently on the stick, and aircraft 05-4098 lifted off the ground as smoothly as if it belonged in the sky. The feeling of flight in an F-22 was extraordinary, with power and responsiveness that made every other aircraft she had flown seem sluggish by comparison. She was actually doing it. She was flying an F-22 Raptor. Raptor 7 airborne, she reported to air traffic control. Climbing to flight level 400. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds over Nevada, Sarah began to configure the electronic warfare systems for the mission ahead. She activated the AESA radar and began scanning for the hijacked airliner, which intelligence estimated was now less than 2 hours from the California coast. Major Jackson pulled into formation beside her, his F-22 looking sleek and deadly in the afternoon sunlight. Raptor 7, Raptor 6. How are you feeling up there? Raptor 6, Raptor 7. Feeling good. This aircraft is incredible. Roger that. Try not to enjoy it too much. We've got work to do. As they flew west toward the intercept point, Sarah realized that the easy part was over. Taking off and flying the F-22 had been challenging, but it was within her capabilities. What came next would test everything she thought she knew about herself and everything she had learned about being a pilot. Somewhere out over the Pacific Ocean, 298 innocent people were counting on her to save their lives. The question was whether she was really ready for what she was about to face. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly below as Sarah flew her F-22 at 40,000 feet, scanning the horizon for any sign of the hijacked airliner. The electronic warfare systems were active, their displays showing a complex pattern of radio signals and radar emissions from dozens of civilian and military aircraft operating in the busy airspace off the California coast. Finding one specific aircraft among all the electronic noise was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Raptor 7, this is Sentry 1, came a voice in Sarah's headset. Sentry 1 was the call sign for the AWACS aircraft coordinating the search, a massive Boeing E-3 flying 200 miles to the east with some of the most sophisticated radar and communication equipment in the world. Sentry 1, Raptor 7, go ahead. Raptor 7, we've lost contact with United 847 approximately 15 minutes ago. Last known position was 200 miles southwest of Los Angeles, heading 045 at flight level 350. Be advised, we're getting intermittent radar contacts in that area, but heavy electronic interference is preventing positive identification. Sarah felt her heart rate increase. The hijackers were clearly using sophisticated jamming equipment to hide from conventional radar systems. This was exactly the scenario that required the advanced electronic warfare capabilities of her F-22, but it also meant she was flying into a situation where the enemy had already demonstrated their technical sophistication. Sentry 1, Raptor 7 copies. Beginning electronic warfare sweep now. Sarah activated the most advanced features of the F-22's AESA radar system. Unlike conventional radar that sent out signals in predictable patterns, the AESA system could create multiple simultaneous beams, change frequencies rapidly, and adapt its signal patterns to defeat jamming attempts. It was technology that was years ahead of anything the hijackers could have obtained through civilian channels. The radar display began to clear as the advanced systems cut through the electronic interference. Sarah could see dozens of aircraft contacts, most of them civilian airliners following normal flight paths along the busy Pacific air routes. But one contact stood out as different from the others. Sentry 1, Raptor 7 has a contact bearing 230, range 180 miles, altitude approximately 35,000 feet. Aircraft appears to be maneuvering erratically and is not following any normal flight path. Raptor 7, can you confirm aircraft type? Sarah refined the radar settings, using the electronic warfare suite to get a clearer picture of the suspicious aircraft. Sentry 1, contact appears consistent with a Boeing 777. No transponder signal, and I'm detecting strong electronic jamming emanating from that position.
That's our target, came the reply from Sentry 1. Raptor 7, you are cleared to approach and attempt contact with United Flight 847. Use caution, we don't know what kind of weapons or capabilities the hijackers might have. Sarah turned toward the target and increased her speed, the F-22's powerful engines pushing her through the thin air at over 600 miles per hour. Major Jackson maintained formation beside her, though his radar was still being affected by the jamming and he couldn't see the target as clearly as Sarah could.
Raptor 6, Raptor 7 has contact with the hijacked aircraft. Following for visual identification. As they closed the distance, Sarah began to make out the shape of a large commercial airliner against the blue backdrop of the Pacific sky.
It was indeed a Boeing 777, painted in United Airlines colors, but something was clearly wrong with its flight pattern. The aircraft was making gentle turns and altitude changes that suggested the hijackers were trying to stay unpredictable while still maintaining controlled flight. Sarah moved her F-22 into a position about 2 miles behind and slightly below the airliner, close enough to make positive identification but far enough away to avoid being seen as a direct threat. Through her canopy, she could see the aircraft clearly now, and the sight made her stomach tighten with anxiety. Sentry 1, Raptor 7 has visual contact with United 847. Aircraft appears to be under control, but flight pattern is inconsistent with normal operations. Raptor 7, attempt radio contact on emergency frequency 121.5. See if you can establish communication with the hijackers. Sarah switched her radio to the international emergency frequency. United Flight 847, United Flight 847, this is United States Air Force aircraft calling on emergency frequency. Please respond. For several long seconds, there was only static. Then, a heavily accented voice came through the radio, speaking English but with obvious difficulty. American fighter jet, you will stay away from this aircraft or we will kill passengers. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. These were the voices of people who had taken control of an aircraft carrying nearly 300 innocent passengers, and they were clearly prepared to use those passengers as leverage to achieve their goals. United 847, this is the United States Air Force. We want to help resolve this situation peacefully. What are your demands? No demands, the voice replied angrily. Only justice. America will pay for what it has done to our people. Sarah exchanged a worried glance with Major Jackson, though she knew he couldn't see her expression through her helmet and oxygen mask. The hijackers weren't negotiating. They weren't making specific demands that could be met through diplomacy. They were planning something that they considered to be justice, which probably meant they were planning to use the aircraft as a weapon. Raptor 7, this is Colonel Martinez, came a new voice in Sarah's headset. The colonel was monitoring the situation from Nellis Air Force Base, and his voice carried the weight of command authority. What's your assessment of the situation? Sarah took a moment to analyze what she was seeing and hearing. Sir, based on their responses and flight pattern, I believe the hijackers are planning to use the aircraft as a weapon against a ground target. They're not interested in negotiation, and they're maintaining course toward the California coast. That's our assessment as well, Colonel Martinez replied grimly. Raptor 7, you are authorized to take any action necessary to prevent this aircraft from reaching a populated area. But, remember, there are 298 innocent people on board. The weight of that authorization settled heavily on Sarah's shoulders. She was being given permission to shoot down a civilian airliner full of innocent people if it became necessary to prevent a larger catastrophe. It was the kind of decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life, but she understood why it might be necessary. Sarah maintained her position behind the airliner while trying to think of alternatives to destroying it. The hijackers clearly had some kind of plan, but they might not be expecting to face an F-22 with advanced electronic warfare capabilities. Maybe there was something she could do to disable their systems without destroying the aircraft. Major Jackson, Sarah called to her wingman, I'm going to try something. Stay back and be ready to provide support. Roger, Raptor 7. What are you planning? Sarah moved her F-22 closer to the hijacked airliner, using her advanced radar systems to scan the aircraft for any unusual electronic emissions. The jamming equipment the hijackers were using had to be powered by the aircraft's electrical systems, and it was probably connected to external antennas or transmitters. What she discovered made her blood run cold. The electronic signature analysis showed that the hijackers had installed much more than just jamming equipment. There were multiple transmitters, what appeared to be explosive charges, and some kind of remote detonation system.
This wasn't just a hijacking.
It was a sophisticated terrorist operation that had been planned well in advance. Sentry 1, Raptor 7 has analyzed the electronic signatures from the target aircraft. The hijackers have installed explosive devices and remote detonation equipment.
This aircraft is definitely intended to be used as a weapon.
The response from Sentry 1 was immediate and chilling.
All aircraft, this is Sentry 1. United 847 is confirmed as a terrorist weapon. All units are cleared to engage if the aircraft approaches any populated area.
Sarah realized that the situation had just escalated to its most serious level. The hijacked airliner was now officially classified as an enemy target, and she had been given authorization to destroy it if necessary. But she still hoped there might be another way. United 847, she called on the radio, this is the United States Air Force.
You are flying toward restricted airspace. Turn south immediately or we will be forced to take action. American pilot, came the angry reply, we are not afraid of your threats.
We have 300 hostages, and if you attack us, their blood will be on your hands.
Sarah felt sick.
The hijackers were using the passengers as human shields, counting on American reluctance to kill innocent people to protect their mission. But they had made a critical mistake. They assumed that the presence of hostages would prevent any military response. They didn't understand that sometimes preventing a larger catastrophe required making impossible choices. The airliner was now less than 100 miles from the California coast, and its heading would take it directly over Los Angeles. Intelligence estimates suggested there were over 4 million people in the potential target area. The horrible mathematics of the situation were clear, 298 lives versus potentially thousands or tens of thousands. Raptor 7, this is Colonel Martinez.
How much time do we have before they reach the coast? Sarah checked her navigation systems. Sir, at current speed and heading, they'll reach the coastline in approximately 12 minutes. Los Angeles City Center in about 20 minutes. Understood.
Continue monitoring and be prepared to engage on my order.
Sarah flew alongside the doomed airliner, watching the California coastline grow larger on the horizon.
Every minute that passed brought the aircraft closer to a populated area where it could be used to kill thousands of innocent people. Every minute also brought her closer to the moment when she might have to fire missiles at an aircraft full of passengers who had done nothing wrong except buy a ticket on the wrong flight. She thought about the people on board the aircraft.
Business travelers heading home to their families. Tourists returning from vacations in Asia. Maybe children traveling with their parents.
All of them were now hostages in a situation they couldn't understand or control, depending on strangers to save their lives. But she also thought about the millions of people in Los Angeles who were going about their normal daily routines, unaware that a terrorist attack was approaching their city.
Office workers, schoolchildren, families shopping or eating dinner, all of them potential victims if the hijackers succeeded in their plan.
Raptor 7, Major Jackson called on the radio, I'm picking up radio chatter from Los Angeles approach control. They're starting to divert aircraft away from the area, but there are still hundreds of flights operating in that airspace.
The situation was getting worse by the minute.
Not only did Sarah have to worry about the hijacked airliner and the passengers on board, but there were now hundreds of other aircraft that could be affected by whatever happened next.
The skies over one of America's busiest metropolitan areas were about to become a war zone. United 847, Sarah called one more time, this is your final warning.
Turn south immediately and land at the nearest available airport, or we will be forced to shoot you down. The response came back in heavily accented English, but the words were clear and chilling.
American pilot, we are not afraid to die for our cause. Today, America will learn that it is not safe from justice.
Sarah realized that negotiation was no longer possible. The hijackers were committed to their plan, whatever it was, and they were not going to be deterred by threats or reasoning. The aircraft was now less than 10 minutes from the coastline, and decisions would have to be made very soon. The quiet analyst who had dreamed of flying fighter jets was about to face the most difficult moment of her life. The California coastline was now clearly visible through Sarah's canopy, a line of golden beaches and urban development stretching as far as she could see. Los Angeles spread out below like a vast carpet of civilization, home to millions of people who had no idea that their lives hung in the balance 35,000 feet above their heads. The hijacked United Airlines 777 continued on its deadly course, now only 8 minutes from crossing into heavily populated airspace.
Sarah's hands gripped the controls of her F-22 as she maintained formation with the doomed airliner.
Every instinct she had developed as a pilot told her to find another solution, some way to save the passengers while still preventing the terrorist attack. But the cold reality of the situation was becoming impossible to ignore. The hijackers had made their choice, and now she would have to make hers. Raptor 7, this is Sentry 1, the AWACS controller's voice crackled in her headset.
We're showing the target aircraft maintaining course toward Los Angeles International Airport.
Intelligence suggests they may be planning to crash into the terminals or use LAX as a staging area for a larger attack.
Sarah analyzed the aircraft's flight path on her navigation display.
The hijackers were indeed heading directly toward one of the busiest airports in the world, where thousands of passengers and airport workers would be going about their normal routines. LAX handled over 80 million passengers per year, making it an attractive target for anyone wanting to cause maximum casualties and symbolic damage.
Sentry 1, Raptor 7 copies.
Request permission to move closer and attempt to force the aircraft off course.
Negative, Raptor 7.
Intelligence believes the hijackers may have installed proximity-triggered explosives.
If you get too close, they might detonate the aircraft prematurely.
Sarah felt frustration building in her chest. Every option seemed to lead to the same terrible conclusion. The hijackers had planned this operation carefully, anticipating various responses and preparing countermeasures for each one. They were forcing her into a situation where the only choice was between a catastrophe with 298 victims and a potentially larger catastrophe with thousands. Raptor 7, this is Colonel Martinez, came the voice of her commanding officer from Nellis Air Force Base. I need to know your status and your readiness to engage if ordered.
Sarah took a deep breath before responding.
The weight of command authority in the colonel's voice reminded her that this was no longer about her personal feelings or moral reservations. She was a United States Air Force officer, and she had a duty to follow orders even when those orders required her to do something that would haunt her forever.
Colonel Martinez, Raptor 7 is in position and ready to engage on your order. Weapons systems are armed and tracking the target. Understood. Stand by for engagement authorization. Sarah could feel her heart pounding as she prepared the F-22's weapons systems for what might come next. The AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles were already selected and ready to fire.
At this range, there would be no chance for the hijackers to evade or defend themselves. The missiles would strike the airliner within seconds of launch, and 298 innocent people would die in an instant. But, even as she prepared for the worst-case scenario, Sarah's mind was racing through alternatives. Her 3 years as an intelligence analyst had taught her to look at problems from multiple angles, to consider possibilities that others might miss. There had to be something she wasn't seeing, some option that could save both the passengers and the people on the ground. She studied the electronic signature analysis from the hijacked aircraft one more time, looking for any detail she might have missed. The jamming equipment, the explosive devices, the remote detonation systems, it was a sophisticated setup that would have required months of planning and significant technical expertise. Then, she noticed something unusual in the electronic emissions pattern. The jamming equipment wasn't just designed to hide the aircraft from radar. It was also interfering with certain radio frequencies used by commercial aviation navigation systems. The hijackers were probably using the jamming to prevent the pilots from calling for help or communicating with air traffic control, but there might be an unintended consequence. Major Jackson, Sarah called to her wingman, can you see the target aircraft's navigation lights? Major Jackson moved his F-22 closer to get a better view of the hijacked airliner. Negative, Raptor 7. No navigation lights visible, and it looks like their landing lights are also off. Sarah's analytical mind began to piece together a disturbing possibility. Commercial aircraft relied on sophisticated navigation systems to maintain their precise flight paths, especially when flying over the ocean where there were no ground-based navigation aids. If the hijackers' jamming equipment was interfering with those systems, the pilots might be flying blind, navigating only by basic compass headings and altitude. Sentry 1, Raptor 7 has a question about the target aircraft's flight path. Has it been maintaining a precise course, or has it been making small corrections and adjustments? There was a pause while the AWACS crew checked their tracking data. Raptor 7, analysis shows the target has been making frequent small course corrections, consistent with manual navigation rather than GPS or INS guidance. Sarah felt a spark of hope. If the hijackers were interfering with the aircraft's navigation systems, they might not realize exactly where they were or exactly where they were heading. The California coastline looked similar for hundreds of miles, and, without precise navigation, it would be easy to mistake one target area for another.
Sentry 1, what major landmarks or targets are located south of the aircraft's current position?
Raptor 7, approximately 50 miles south of current position is Camp Pendleton Marine Corps Base. Beyond that is San Diego and the Mexican border.
Sarah's mind raced as she considered the implications.
If she could somehow trick the hijackers into thinking they were approaching Los Angeles when they were actually approaching a less populated area, she might be able to force them to execute their attack in a location where fewer innocent people would be at risk.
But, how could she manipulate their navigation without them realizing what was happening?
The answer came to her in a flash of inspiration that drew on everything she had learned about electronic warfare during her years as an analyst. Sentry 1, I have an idea, but I need authorization to deviate from standard engagement protocols.
Raptor 7, explain your plan. Sarah outlined her idea quickly, knowing that time was running out. The hijacked aircraft was now less than 5 minutes from crossing into heavily populated airspace. Her plan was risky and had never been attempted before, but it might offer a chance to save both the passengers and the people on the ground. Sentry 1, I believe I can use my electronic warfare systems to selectively jam the hijackers' navigation equipment while simultaneously providing false GPS signals that will make them think they're approaching Los Angeles when they're actually being guided toward a less populated area. There was a long pause while the AWACS crew consulted with higher authority.
Finally, the controller came back on the radio.
Raptor 7, you are authorized to attempt electronic navigation manipulation.
But be aware that if your plan fails, you will still be required to engage the target before it reaches populated areas.
Sarah immediately began configuring her F-22's advanced electronic warfare suite for the most complex jamming operation of her career.
She had to create a selective interference pattern that would disrupt the hijackers' equipment while leaving the aircraft's basic flight controls unaffected. At the same time, she had to generate false GPS signals that would gradually steer the aircraft away from Los Angeles toward the less populated areas around Camp Pendleton.
The process required split-second timing and incredible precision. Sarah had to match the frequency signatures of commercial navigation satellites while overpowering the hijackers' jamming signals.
It was like performing surgery with a sledgehammer while riding a roller coaster, but her years of studying electronic warfare systems had prepared her for exactly this kind of challenge.
Electronic warfare systems active, she announced over the radio. Beginning navigation manipulation now. Sarah watched her displays intently as her jamming signals began to interfere with the hijacked aircraft's navigation systems.
Almost immediately, she could see the aircraft beginning to make course corrections as the pilots tried to compensate for what they thought were navigation errors. Gradually, subtly, she began introducing false GPS signals that would make the hijackers believe they were still heading toward Los Angeles while actually steering them toward the ocean and the sparsely populated areas around Camp Pendleton. The process required constant adjustment and monitoring, as she had to maintain the illusion while gradually changing the aircraft's course by nearly 20 degrees.
Sentry 1, target aircraft is responding to navigation manipulation.
Course is slowly changing from 045 to approximately 065. If current trend continues, aircraft will pass south of Los Angeles metropolitan area.
Outstanding work, Raptor 7. Continue current operations. For the next several minutes, Sarah flew alongside the hijacked airliner while carefully manipulating its navigation systems.
It was like playing a complex video game where the stakes were hundreds of lives and the margin for error was essentially zero. One mistake in her electronic warfare signals could alert the hijackers to what was happening, or worse, could cause them to lose control of the aircraft entirely. As the aircraft passed over the California coastline, Sarah could see that her plan was working. Instead of heading toward downtown Los Angeles, the airliner was now flying over the relatively unpopulated areas between Los Angeles and San Diego. There were still people at risk, but the potential casualty count had dropped from tens of thousands to hundreds. United 847, she called on the radio, you are now approaching your target area.
What are your intentions?
American pilot, came the reply from the hijackers, we can see the city below us.
We will complete our mission now.
Sarah's heart sank as she realized that the hijackers were about to execute their plan, whatever it was. Even though she had successfully diverted them away from the most populated areas, there were still nearly 300 innocent passengers on board who were about to die through no fault of their own. But, then, something unexpected happened. Instead of diving toward the ground or detonating explosive devices, the hijacked aircraft began to level off and reduce speed.
Sarah watched in confusion as the aircraft's behavior changed completely.
Sentry 1, target aircraft is not executing an attack profile. Repeat, target aircraft appears to be entering a holding pattern rather than diving toward ground targets.
Raptor 7, we're seeing the same thing.
Stand by while we try to determine what's happening. Sarah maintained her position near the aircraft while trying to understand what the hijackers were planning. After several minutes of circling, she heard new voices on the radio frequency, speaking in heavily accented English but with a tone of confusion and concern. American aircraft, this is the captain of United Flight 847.
We have regained control of our aircraft.
The hijackers have been subdued by passengers and crew members.
Sarah felt a surge of relief and disbelief.
United 847, this is United States Air Force Raptor 7. Please confirm your status and the condition of passengers and crew. Raptor 7, this is Captain Williams of United Flight 847. We had 3 hijackers on board who took control of the aircraft approximately 4 hours ago. About 10 minutes ago, they became confused and disoriented when their navigation equipment malfunctioned. The passengers and flight crew were able to overpower them during the confusion.
Sarah realized what had happened.
Her electronic warfare operations had not only changed the aircraft's course, but had also disrupted the hijackers' ability to coordinate their activities. When their equipment stopped working properly, they had become vulnerable to passenger resistance.
United 847, what is the condition of the hijackers and any explosive devices they may have installed?
Raptor 7, we have the 3 hijackers secured, and our maintenance crew has located and disconnected several suspicious devices. We're declaring an emergency and requesting immediate escort to the nearest suitable airport. Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face inside her oxygen mask. Against all odds, her desperate plan had not only prevented a terrorist attack but had also saved the lives of everyone on board the hijacked aircraft. The quiet analyst who had been underestimated by everyone around her had just accomplished something that would normally be considered impossible. United 847, this is Raptor 7.
You are cleared to land at Los Angeles International Airport. We'll provide escort and ensure that emergency services are standing by.
As she guided the rescued airliner toward LAX, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary events of the day. 24 hours earlier, she had been a nobody analyst updating maintenance schedules in a windowless office. Now, she was flying the most advanced fighter jet in the world and had just prevented one of the most serious terrorist attacks since September 11th. But, more importantly, 298 innocent people were going home to their families instead of becoming victims of terrorism. Sometimes, being underestimated was exactly the advantage you needed to accomplish the impossible. The hidden pilot was hidden no more.